The snow crunched beneath Cade's insulated boots as he trudged through the knee-deep drifts, each breath crystallizing before his face. The scavenging expedition had yielded more than expected, a small victory on a planet that rarely offered any. His pack bulged with nutrient capsules and protein blocks scavenged from an abandoned research station half buried in the permafrost. Epsilon Eridani B, or Frostfall as the colonists called it, hadn't been anyone's first choice for settlement, but after the resource wars, desperate people couldn't be choosers. The planet's permanent winter had been deemed manageable compared to the toxic atmospheres or gravitational anomalies of other options. What the planetary surveys hadn't accounted for was that humans weren't the only species seeking refuge. The Muraxi had arrived shortly after the human colony was established, their own homeworld rendered uninhabitable by the same interstellar conflict. Cade adjusted his thermal mask against the biting wind. Another hour's walk and he'd be back at the outpost, a collection of prefabricated structures and repurposed ship components nestled in a valley that offered minimal protection from Frostfall's relentless storms. He never saw the attack coming. A figure lunged from behind a jagged ice formation, moving with a desperate ferocity that sent them both sprawling into the snow. Cade felt something sharp press against his throat, a crude knife fashioned from scrap metal. "Food," a hoarse voice demanded. "Give it now." Cade's combat training from his military days kicked in. With a practiced movement, he twisted, breaking the attacker's unsteady grip and reversing their positions. The hood fell back, revealing iridescent violet skin stretched taut over angular features, large almond-shaped eyes wide with fear. A Muraxi woman and clearly starving. Her gaunt face and trembling limbs told a story of prolonged hunger. "Please," she whispered, no longer struggling beneath his weight, "I have nothing left." Colony protocol was clear: no aid to aliens beyond the designated zone at the settlement's edge. Resources were too scarce for charity. Most colonists followed this rule without question, viewing the Muraxi as unwelcome competition rather than fellow refugees. Cade should drag her to the security officers, or at minimum, leave her with a warning. A faint sound carried on the wind, a high-pitched whimper that wasn't the howling gale. Cade froze, listening intently. There it was again. "What was that?" he demanded. The Muraxi woman's eyes filled with fear. "Nothing, just the wind." Keeping her pinned with one arm, Cade swept his gaze across the barren landscape until he spotted a small bundle partly concealed behind a nearby rock formation. Rising cautiously, he approached the quivering mass of tattered thermal fabric. Inside lay a tiny Muraxi infant, no larger than a human newborn, its skin a paler violet than its mother's, eyes squeezed shut as it cried weakly. Its small chest heaved with labored breaths, lips tinged with a dangerous blue. "How long has it been since either of you ate?" Cade asked, turning back to the woman who had scrambled to her feet, terror and defiance warring in her expression. "3 days for me," she said. "I've been able to feed a Leo small amounts until yesterday." Cade looked between mother and child, knowing the infant wouldn't survive the night in these temperatures without proper shelter and nutrition. Colony regulations or not, he couldn't leave them to die. "I'm Cade," he said, making his decision. "What's your name?" "Vila," she replied warily. "All right, Vila, I have a shelter about 2 kilometers from here. You and your child can come with me." He shouldered his pack again, but no more knives. She hesitated, then nodded, gathering her whimpering child close to her chest. "The storm's getting worse," Cade observed as the wind intensified. "Stay close." As they began the trudge through deepening snow, he wondered what consequences this choice would bring. The colony didn't forgive rule breakers, especially those who aided the competition. But watching Vila clutch her child with fierce protectiveness, Cade knew some things transcended colony politics. Some things were simply human, even when the faces weren't. The storm had intensified by the time they reached Cade's shelter, a repurposed escape pod reinforced with salvaged materials and half buried in the permafrost for insulation. As the entry hatch sealed behind them, shutting out the howling wind, the sudden silence felt almost deafening. "Sit there," Cade instructed, gesturing toward a small heating unit in the corner. "It's the warmest spot." Vila sank down, cradling a Leo against her chest. The infant's cries had subsided to weak whimpers that concerned Cade more than full-throated wailing would have. "When did you last have a medical scan for him?" Cade asked, activating the environmental systems to raise the temperature. "Before we fled the refugee camp," Vila replied, her voice thin. 3 weeks ago." Cade rummaged through his supplies, producing a nutrient pack designed for emergency use. "This isn't ideal for either of you, but it's better than nothing," he said, preparing the solution. "The liquid should be gentle enough for the little one." Veela accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice even as she carefully tipped small amounts of the nutrient solution into her child's mouth. "Does it matter?" "On this planet, yes," her large eyes held his. "Humans here don't help Muraxi without expecting something in return." Cade busied himself preparing another meal pack. "I served in the final years of the resource wars," he said at last. "Saw enough suffering to last several lifetimes. When it ended, I thought," he shook his head, "doesn't matter what I thought, the point is, I've never seen a conflict where the children deserved what happened to them." The small shelter grew warmer as they ate in silence. Cade observed how Veela took only small bites, focusing mainly on feeding her child. The infant's color was improving, the dangerous blue tinge receding from his lips. "You were military?" Veela asked eventually. Cade nodded, "Tactical support for the Outer Rim Coalition." "You?" "Botanical researcher. I was studying sustainable agriculture methods when the evacuation orders came." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Ironic that my expertise could be useful here, yet I'm barred from your greenhouses." "The colony leadership fears integration would lead to resource competition," Cade said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "So instead we slowly starve in the margins." Veela stroked her child's head where fine, silvery filaments were beginning to emerge. "Elio's father believed your colony would eventually accept assistance. He was an engineer, designed irrigation systems. He thought," her voice broke, "he didn't survive the journey here." The storm rattled the shelter's exterior, the wind screaming like a wounded animal. Cade checked the seals on the windows before settling onto his sleeping mat. "What happened to your camp?" he asked. "Raiders, desperate humans from outlying settlements. They took our remaining supplies 3 weeks ago." Cade frowned. The colony security forces didn't intervene. "They said it was beyond their jurisdiction." Veela's expression hardened. One officer suggested it was natural selection at work. Silence fell between them again, interrupted only by Elio's occasional sounds as he drifted into sleep, his belly full perhaps for the first time in days. "I lost someone too," Cade said abruptly. "My partner in the service, the final battle for Tau Ceti. After that, I couldn't stay in the military." He rarely spoke of this to anyone. Coming here was supposed to be a fresh start. Veela studied him, her expressive eyes reflecting the dim light. "Has it been?" "I'm still waiting to find out." As the night deepened, Cade offered Veela his sleeping berth, opting to rest in the chair. Just before he drifted off, he noticed how the tension in her shoulders had eased slightly, and how, in sleep, with her child secure in her arms, she looked less alien than simply a mother protecting what she loved most. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their temporary sanctuary, something fragile was beginning to form, a bridge across the divide that war and prejudice had created. 5 days had passed since the storm, and Cade had established a routine. Each morning, he would leave Veela and Elio hidden in his shelter while he reported to his assigned duties at the colony's maintenance facility. Each evening, he would return with whatever supplies he could quietly divert, nutrient packs, medical supplies, and occasionally, fresh produce from the greenhouses. Tonight, he brought something special. "Real fruit," Veela breathed as he produced 2 small, pale green apples. "I haven't seen these since." "They started producing in Greenhouse 3 last week," Cade explained. "Nothing like Earth varieties, but they're adapting to the artificial light conditions." He watched as Veela carefully cut small pieces for Elio, whose condition had improved dramatically. The infant's eyes, large and luminous like his mother's but with flecks of gold rather than her deep purple, followed Cade's movements with increasing awareness. "He's tracking movement better," Cade observed. "Yes," Veela smiled, the expression transforming her angular features. "Muraxi children develop visual acuity quickly. By next month, he'll be able to distinguish complex patterns." The shelter had become surprisingly comfortable for its cramped dimensions. Veela had reorganized Cade's sparse belongings with efficient precision, creating designated areas for sleeping, food preparation, and even a small play space for Elio using repurposed containers. "There's talk in the colony," Cade said, sitting across from her at the small folding table. "Shortages in the eastern quadrant. Some people are blaming unauthorized scavenging by Muraxi." Veela's expression darkened. "It's always easier to blame us than address the real problems." A security sweep is planned for the outskirts tomorrow. They'll be checking for hidden Murexi camps. Cade hesitated. You can't stay here much longer without risk of discovery. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, an awareness that had been building during their shared days and nights. In the close confines of the shelter, they had learned each other's habits, preferences, and rhythms. Where would we go? The winter is deepening. Vila gathered Elio into her arms. Without shelter, we wouldn't survive a single night. I've been thinking about that. Cade activated his datapad, displaying a schematic of the colony. There's an automated monitoring station in Sector 7. It's minimally staffed, just periodic maintenance checks. It has environmental controls, basic supplies. You're suggesting we hide there, wouldn't someone notice? Not if I'm the one assigned to maintenance checks. Cade leaned forward. I could transfer there, claim I need the solitude. No one would question it. I've built a reputation as something of a loner. Vila reached across the table, her slender fingers resting on his hand. Her touch was cooler than a human's, but not unpleasant. Why would you risk so much for us? The question hung in the air between them. Cade looked down at her hand on his, at the subtle patterns that shimmered beneath her skin, bioluminescent markings that seemed to pulse slightly in the dim light. Because for the first time since I arrived on this frozen rock, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, he admitted. Their faces were close now, the small table between them suddenly seeming to shrink. Cade, she said softly, on my world, we believe connections between souls transcend physical forms. He could feel her breath, slightly cooler than a human's would be, against his face. And what do your people say about connections between different species? That they are rare, she whispered, and precious beyond measure. When their lips met, the sensation was unlike anything Cade had experienced, a tingling warmth that spread from the point of contact throughout his body. Her luminescent markings brightened subtly as she leaned into the kiss. They broke apart at Elio's sudden coo, the infant watching them with curious eyes. He approves, Vila said with a small laugh, her markings still glowing. That night, as they lay together in the small sleeping berth, Elio nestled between them, Cade realized he had crossed a line from which there was no return. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, but that connection now placed all three of them in danger. Outside the shelter, the winds of frostfall howled their warning, reminding them of the harsh reality that awaited beyond their fragile sanctuary.